Today's case is a solved case of Derrick Robie, who was 4 years old at the time of his tragic death. Derrick was born October 2nd, 1988. Derrick was very sweet and full of energy, as many young children are at that age. He had the sweetest smile and just enjoyed life. He absolutely loved animals, playing baseball, and enjoyed playing very innocent pranks on others in the neighborhood. An example that his mother Doreen Robie and dad Dale Robie shared was when Derrick knew that people would walk by and Derrick would place a rubber snake to try and scare them while he watched from afar by the window.
Yeah, he knew that the older ladies would be walking to church, and so he took his rubber snake out and laid it on the sidewalk and then watched out the window as people walked up the sidewalk.
Derrick loved playing pranks, but also was such an outgoing child. He also loved sitting at the corner on his bike and waving to the cars that drove by. Derrick absolutely loved his family dearly, and he also became an older brother and seemed to be adjusting very well with sharing his parents' attention. Derrick was entering kindergarten and just shy of his 5th birthday coming up on October 2nd. Derrick's family lived in a tiny New York village of Savona. This village is a very small community, and it's the kind that never feared anything dangerous happening. Everyone knew each other, the kids would play outside freely, and it seemed like everyone got along very well. The small village only had a population of about 1,000, so no one could ever imagine the turn of events that were about to happen in this tiny New York village. It was the morning of August 2nd, 1993. Doreen had her hands full with her 2 sons, Derrick Robie and Derrick's baby brother, Dalton Robie, who was just not in a good mood at that moment that Doreen was trying to make her way to drop off Derrick at the day camp program at a nearby park, like she always did during the summer. Doreen at times would watch Derrick from the end of the driveway and watch him make his way to the day camp that was only a block away from their house. There weren't any streets that Derrick would have to cross on his way there. However, Doreen was having a difficult time and felt it was okay this one time to allow Derrick to make the very short trip to the day camp. Derrick himself felt comfortable doing so. He said to his mom, quote, "It's okay, Mom, I'll go by myself," quote. They kissed each other and said "I love yous," and Derrick began making his way. Doreen noticed the sudden weather change. It started to storm with clouds, and she started to feel an unsettling feeling. She made her way to the day camp at around 11 a.m. to pick up Derrick. However, she quickly became frantic as she was informed that Derrick never showed up to day camp. The search for Derrick began, but it wouldn't last long. Derrick's remains were found 4 hours later in the wooded area that was halfway between the park to where he was headed. This next part was very upsetting to research on, and it's not easy for anyone's family to experience. It's not something anyone should go through. Derrick's body endured a lot of trauma. He had been strangled, a large stone was used that caused blunt force trauma to the head, and had Kool-Aid poured into his cuts. Another item from Derrick's lunch bag that was oddly left at the scene was a banana that was smashed. He was also SA'd. Derrick's left sneaker had been removed and was laid next to his right hand, and his right sneaker had been removed too and was laid next to his left hand. The lead investigator, Charles Wood, recalls that it looked like whoever did this to Derrick intentionally posed Derrick in that position. Investigators and the community were shocked upon this discovery. How could this have happened in broad daylight? The community were on their toes, alarmed that whoever did this could have been someone passing through town, or even worse, residing in town. It wouldn't be until 4 days later that investigators would have a lead in their investigation. A young 13-year-old boy from the community named Eric Smith walked into the police station to see if he could provide some assistance to the case of 4-year-old Derrick. It seems that at first, Eric denied seeing Derrick at that time of day when the incident happened, but he shortly changes his story and says that he actually saw Derrick across the street from the open field, as Eric also attended the same day camp and was making his way there too. Investigators asked Eric what Derrick was wearing that day he saw him, and Eric was able to identify Derrick's clothing, and not only identify his clothing, but also shared that he saw Derrick holding a lunch bag. When Eric shared this piece of information, investigators noticed how happy and energetic Eric seemed, helping investigators. Investigators asked Eric where exactly did he last see Derrick, and Eric's demeanor suddenly began to change. Eric's voice starts cracking up, he places his head down, and his fist starts to shake. Eric asks investigators, quote, "You think I killed him, don't you?" quote. Eric asks for a break as it looked like he was starting to feel overwhelmed by the questioning. Detectives agreed to take a break, and Eric's stepdad was present and brought Eric some red Kool-Aid. And Eric grabs the red Kool-Aid and throws it on the ground. After this gesture, investigators became alarmed that Eric could have witnessed something traumatic that he wasn't ready to share just yet. So they sent Eric home to get some rest, but they asked Eric to meet with them on his bike the next day to show them in person where he was when he saw Derrick on August 2nd. There is video footage of Eric showing investigators where he was when he saw Derrick. Once Eric showed investigators where he was on his bike that day when he saw Derrick, investigators quickly realized that the location that Eric showed them was nearly impossible to have a clear vision of Derrick. Investigators and Eric's parents both became suspicious of Eric's claims and felt strongly that Eric knew more than what he was claiming. Derrick was laid to rest 5 days after his passing with his baseball uniform. Soon after Derrick's funeral, a confession was made 2 days later. Now there were mixed reactions to the release of the news of who was responsible for Derrick's passing. Some were surprised and some were not surprised. 13-year-old Eric Smith made the shocking confession to his family that he was responsible for what had happened to 4-year-old Derrick Robie. At first, Eric's family and investigators initially suspected that he knew more about what he saw happen to Derrick, but never imagined that he would be responsible to this extent. Derrick tells his mom, quote, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. I killed that little boy," quote. Eric admitted to luring Derrick into the woods. He asked Derrick if he wanted to see a shortcut and led him into the woods where he strangled him and used a large rock that he dropped against Derrick's head and poured red Kool-Aid into Derrick's room and essayed him. Shortly after this confession, Eric's parents notified authorities that same night, and Eric was arrested and charged with Derrick's death. Upon Eric's arrest, this created a media frenzy all over the world. Those who were not from the community were completely shocked that a young, innocent-looking child, a 13-year-old, could do such a horrible crime to another young, innocent child. The Smiths' neighbor, Marlene and John, were very close with the Smith family. They came forward sharing some odd behavior that they experienced prior to Eric's arrest. Marlene recalls Eric asking her, quote, "What would happen if it turned out to be a kid?" quote. Marlene shared her honest opinion and said that she believed if it was a child, that they would need psychiatric help. Eric also asked Marlene what exactly DNA testing meant. Once Eric was finished asking questions, he simply responded with, quote, "Oh, okay," quote, and he walked away. Marlene also recalled a time that Eric slept over at their house in the living room. Marlene's son was sound asleep when he started to wake up due to feeling something hot on his face. When he opened his eyes, he saw Eric had a lit cigarette placed on his nose. Another neighbor, Becky, recalls Eric using a clamp from a vacuum cleaner and slowly strangling a cat lifeless when Eric was just only 9 years old. On September 2nd, 1993, a grand jury indicted that 13-year-old Eric Smith to be charged with second-degree murder and would be tried as an adult, which in the New York state law allowed minors to be tried as an adult when a life was taken away. Though Eric made a confession to his family, Eric pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder. It wouldn't be until a year later, in August of 1994, that Eric Smith's trial began. There was a lot of interesting information that was presented by Eric Smith's defense attorney. The main in particular was Eric's defense psychiatrist, Dr. Stephen Herman, made claims that Eric suffered from a very serious mental disease that was classified as a rage disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, which is an uncontrollable rage, and once the rage episode is over, the child may appear calm and normal. However, the prosecutors did not agree with this claim as this disorder was rarely seen in Eric's age. Eric was examined by medical experts on both sides, but neither the defense nor the prosecutors could find any abnormal brain function, hormone levels that would explain Eric's violent behavior towards 4-year-old Derrick. Dr. Herman, however, did believe that a drug that Tammy Smith, Eric's mother, was taking for most of her life may have caused Eric's ears to be low-set and caused his developmental delays that could have impacted his self-esteem. Dr. Herman was not suggesting that the drug would have caused Eric to be violent, but could have had a severe impact on his stage of development. Tammy suffered from epilepsy, and doctors placed Tammy on a drug that controlled her epilepsy called tridone. And Tammy was on this medication throughout the pregnancy of Eric, which can cause birth defects. Now, Eric's school life was also not the best. It was revealed that Eric experienced severe bullying due to his physical appearances, such as his visible low-set ears, red hair, freckles, and for wearing thick glasses. He was taunted and didn't have many friends due to being bullied for looking different. Eric was described as a child who commonly had temper tantrums and would bang his head against the floor to release his anger. It seems like Eric's stepdad did have awareness from Eric himself expressing that he needed help, but Ted Smith simply told Eric to hold it. Ted shared some advice and told Eric that when he was a young child himself, he would let his anger out by using a bag from his barn and beating it. Ted recalled Eric shutting the door and returned a short time later in a much calmer state of mind. Ted quickly noticed Eric's knuckles and his hands were red and bloody. Eric told Ted he had hit the tree several times, and this appeared to have calmed Eric. Finally, after deliberation, Eric was convicted of second-degree murder and was sentenced to the maximum term that was permitted for juveniles that committed heinous crimes. Eric received 9 years to life in prison. Throughout the trial, Eric is described as showing lack of remorse and having a blank face. Eric never shared the reasoning to why he took Derrick's life away or never apologized for his wrongdoing until a decade later. While he was doing his time behind bars, Eric shared in interviews that he committed this crime because he felt the urge to hurt someone due to his bullying and abuse he endured at such a young age. Eric shared that he was riding his bike to the day camp, and upon arriving and finding out it was closed, it put him in a very bad mood. Eric said he was already in a bad mood, and this made it worse. Eric crossed paths with Derrick, and without thinking, took his anger out on him. Eric put in writing an apology letter to Derrick's family, which Eric himself was able to read out loud on public television. He states, quote, "I recognize that my actions have resulted in a terrible loss for the Robie family, and I sincerely apologize. I've tried to think about everything Derrick will never have: his 16th birthday, Christmas, any time owning his own house, graduating, going to college, getting married, and having his first child. If I could go back in time, I would take Derrick's place and bear all of the pain I've caused him. I'd switch places if it meant he'd keep living, but I can't." Quote. Eric spent only 3 years in a juvenile facility and then was transferred to another prison for young adults. For unknown reasons, he was transferred to 4 more facilities. Once Eric was able to apply for parole, he did. He applied for parole 10 times between the years of 2002 and January 2020. Upon hearing the news each time Eric was up for parole, Derrick's parents did everything they could to prevent him from being accepted. Dale and Doreen fought to pass Penny's Law, which is a law that would lengthen prison sentences for young adolescents who commit a crime of taking a life away. They also pushed for a change in law requirements that offenders should wait 5 years instead of 2 years before being able to apply for parole again. This was because both Doreen and Dale had to constantly relive the painful events every 2 years that Eric applied for parole.
A little tired, run down, and I think this year myself being a little angry. We've done it, for so many years. Let's help somebody else.
Dale and Dory say they came up with the idea to push for legislation that would extend the amount of time between parole hearings for people convicted of heinous crimes.
Doreen and Dale were not allowed to be present during these parole hearings, but would write letters and send videos they made of Derrick. The community of Savona even held peaceful protests to support Doreen and Dale. They held candles and created signs with Derrick's face and name. Because of Derrick's parents' advocacy, Eric was consistently denied parole every 2 years that he was able to apply. During the parole hearings, Eric shared that he initially wanted to live again in Savona, but later shared that he would relocate someplace else due to his awareness that the community was not happy about his wishes. Eric also shared that he was engaged to be married to a woman he met. The woman had contacted him while she was studying to be a lawyer and was conducting research on a juvenile justice system. While serving his time, Eric studied and became certified in carpentry and electrical installation, and he said he looked forward to working in those fields if he was granted release. Eric was finally granted parole in October 2021 after serving 27 years in jail. Eric was officially released from the Woodburn Correctional Facility on February 1st, 2022. Doreen and Dale didn't have any comments right away upon the release of Eric, but they eventually did. On a special episode for 48 Hours, Doreen shares, quote, "You know, he's been released, but in a way, so have we. No more parole. I can get on with our lives. Now the true healing can begin," quote. Doreen and Dale strive to focus on their friends and family, especially their now 30-year-old son, Dalton. It's unbelievable that something like this could happen and involve 2 young minors. There was nothing but positive commentary on Derrick and how innocent he was. He was just an innocent child that was clearly in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was filled with so much life and embraced every bit of it while he was still alive. The Savona community came together to provide a safer healing environment for Derrick's family. Volunteers from the community cleared the wooded area where the incident happened. A ball field and a statue of Derrick holding a baseball bat, wearing a hat, is now in place in memory of Derrick Robie. To this day, the small village of Savona still remembers sweet young Derrick, who was filled with life. I'd love to hear your feedback and questions that you still may have. Comment if there is any possible information that I may have missed, as I did my very best to conduct a deep research. A kind reminder to please be mindful of negative comments, as these are real people's lives. All I want to do is bring light to cases that are not always talked about and advocate for victims and their families. I believe we can all learn and grow from each other's stories and help one another. Until the next case, please stay safe and always spread kindness.